This is the Wheel of Time Spoilers podcast. Your hosts are Seth Jacobson and Patrick Hylar.
Hi, I'm Seth.
And I'm Patrick.
This is Chapter 3 of Lord of Chaos, A Woman's Eyes, and our symbol is the Dragon's Fang.
We get to meet some of our Black Tower infamous folks.
Oh man, Jer Grady. When I saw that name, I was like, whoa, I forgot.
Dahmer Flynn.
Yeah.
Fedwin Moore, the healer. Fedwin Moore, the blocks.
This is kind of an odd chapter. It's dark.
Yeah.
Particularly the scene when, I think it's Jer Grady is like, Lord Dragon, my lord, I think I might just go home. Like, he's just afraid, you know? I think it's Jer Grady that says that. We'll get there in a second, but... And Rand kind of...
to stay.
Yeah, Rand kind of says, so, well, you know, I guess we'll manage fighting the last battle without you. Okay. Like, Rand's basically like, you can go, but... He kind of guilts him. You can go. Maybe you can find a place where the last battle won't happen.
I mean, and it's true. It's the you can't get away from the Dark One. Do you want to fight, or do you want to hope that somebody else is going to stand up for you?
Yeah.
And I think that's an important thing to realize, that someone's got to stand up.
Stealing his irritation and Lews Theron's mutters, Rand reached out for Saidin, launched himself into the now familiar battle for control and survival in the midst of emptiness. The taint oozed through him as he channeled. Even within the void, he could feel it seeming to filter into his bones, perhaps into his soul. He had no way to describe what he did except as making a fold in the pattern, a hole through it. This he had learned on his own, and his teacher had not been very good at explaining even what lay behind the things he taught. A bright vertical line appeared in the air, widening quickly into an opening the size of a large doorway. In truth, it seemed to turn, the view through it, a sunlit clearing among drought-draggled trees rotating to a halt. Nyla and two more maidens lifted their veils and leapt through almost before it settled. Half a dozen others followed, some with horn bows ready. Rand did not expect there to be anything for them to guard against. He had put the other end, if there was another end, he did not understand. But it seemed to him there was only one, in the clearing, because a gateway opening up could be dangerous around people. But telling maidens, or any Aiel, that there was no need to be on guard was like telling a fish there was no need to swim. This is a gateway, he told Taim. I'll show you how to make one, if you didn't catch it. The man was staring at him. If he had been watching carefully, he should have seen Rand's weaving of Saidin. Any man able to channel could do that. I think this is that moment you were talking about last week, where Taim just kind of stares at Rand and he's like, no, I didn't know how to make a gateway. There's that kind of weak moment.
Assuming he did. Again, because we talked a little bit about this in the last chapter, but we assume Taim has been trained for the last few months by Demandred. And so he is probably up on gateways, maybe a few other things. I actually had a question for you. Do you think he's been, when he pledged to the Dark One, if he wasn't already, do you think he was stripped of the taint that was on him, or do you think he kept it?
That's a good question. I suspect that Taim has been a dark friend for a really long time. Oh, you know what? Actually, and I'm forgetting that we kind of established, I believe it was during our last recording, that Taim has been channeling for less long than people think.
Right.
That Rand had thought maybe 15 years, but the answer was actually something more like 6 or something like that. So it's, okay, maybe it's a little more likely he hasn't been like a lifetime dark friend, but that still seems like a long time. It's hard to say.
We have from a Robert Jordan quote. He said that Taim was always kind of a bad dude, but he wasn't a dark friend until he was rescued by the Demandred from the Aes Sedai.
Okay.
And that's really when he turned.
So he really,
and that's a statement by Jordan.
He really has managed to channel for at least 5 or 6 years without going insane, and without without direct help.
Which, again, is not outside the realm of possibility. We do see some people last, even in, like, Rand's alternate futures, sometimes he lasted far longer than 5 or 6 years.
Taim joined him as he stepped through into the clearing, Sulin and the rest of the maidens following. Some gave the sword at Rand's hip a disdainful glance as they streamed past him, and Maiden Handtalk flashed silently among them, disgustedly, no doubt. Anila and the foreguard had already spread out warily among the bedraggled trees. Their coats and breeches, the cadent sore, made them seem part of the shadows, whether or not he had added green or gray or brown. They had added. With the power in him, Rand could see each dead needle distinctly on each of the pines. More were dead than were alive. He could smell the sour sap of the leather leaves. The air itself smelled hot, dry and dusty. There was no danger for him here. "Wait, Rand al'Thor," came a woman's urgent voice from the other side of the gateway. Avienda's voice. Rand let go of the weave and Sidene immediately, and the gateway winked out, just as it had come. There were dangers and dangers. Taim looked at him curiously. Some of the maidens, veiled and unveiled, spared him a moment for looks of their own, disapproving ones. Fingers flashed in Maiden Handtalk. They had the sense to keep their tongues still, though. He had made himself clear on that. Ignoring curiosity and disapproval alike, Rand started off through the trees with Taim at his side, dead leaves and twigs crackling as they went. The maidens in a wide circle around them made no sound in their soft boots, laced to the knee. Vigilance buried their moment of rebuke. Some had made this journey with Rand before, always without incident, but nothing would ever convince them these woods were not a good site for an ambush. Before Rand, life in the waste had been nearly 3,000 years of raids, skirmishes, feuds, and wars, unbroken for any length of time. There were surely things he could learn from Taim, if not nearly so much as Taim thought, but the teaching would go both ways, and it was time for him to start educating the older man. Sooner or later, you will come up against the Forsaken, following me, maybe before the last battle, probably before. You don't seem surprised. I've heard rumors. They had to break free eventually, so the word was spreading. Rand grinned in spite of himself. Even that is just dark. Why are you smiling? That's not good.
Well, he likes that people are hearing about the fact that Forsaken are out.
Yeah.
That they're starting to believe. On the other hand, I think, again,
it's a little weird.
I think Taim is lying. I think he hasn't heard rumors. I think he's been hanging out with Demandred. He's like, I've heard rumors that I've been hanging out with Demandred for the past 6 months. Yeah.
Yeah. I've heard people saying that about me.
I'm pretty sure they're out. Yeah. Because I'm chilling with them. They rescued me. It's one of those things where it's very possible that the rumors really aren't spreading.
Maybe not. And, we always know at least that what rumors we do see are usually unreliable. At best, unreliable.
At best, yeah. There's a kernel of truth in there, but they tend to go away. Well, I notice he's avoiding Avienda by jumping. He closed the gateway before she can join him.
Yeah.
Really, ever since she died, he's been avoiding her. And, I mean, that is sort of a bit of confirmation. It's like, anyone I love is at risk around me and may die at any moment, and she did. Now, he got her back, but he has been staying away from Avienda ever since that battle. And I believe it's entirely because he fears losing her again.
Yeah, I think you're right.
Kind of reminds me of, what's the scene in The Incredibles when he's like, I'm not strong enough. And she's like, what do you mean you're not strong enough? And he's like, I'm not strong enough to lose you again. And that's exactly how I picture Rand in that situation. Like, I lost you once and I can't do it again. So get the fuck out of my life.
Yeah, you definitely get that feeling at the end of that chapter, at the end of that sequence when I guess after Rand and Nynaeve double team, what's it? Ravine. Also
an interesting way of putting that.
I'm not gonna lie, I just didn't have the name there for a second.
Oh, I just mean
the good-looking one.
Double teaming.
Oh.
and with Mogedi in there, it was technically a threesome.
Or something.
Bonded with the collar and bonded with fire.
After this year, I just kind of have Rand and Taim in this weird conversation.
I think we get our first mention of a golem here.
Yeah.
Because that's not something that's come up before. And that was a fun little foreshadowing for Like, wait, what's a golem? Are we going to see a golem?
Yeah, that's always fun. Because our characters are steeped in this tradition, so they know these words in a lot of cases, but they don't know necessarily what these things are.
This isn't even tradition. This is a memory from Lewis Theron, something that was made during the War of Power. And as far as we can tell, we've never seen or heard of a golem before. This is entirely just like pre-Third Age memory of Lewis Theron. And we get a differentiation here between the fragments and the voice, where, and I think this, again, reinforces my theory, but I just talk about how the fragments are not something he can fight. They're basically his own memories, whereas the voice, I believe, is the insanity. And so the fragments just come to him. They're just part of his own mind.
Yeah, it becomes confusing at a certain point. Sometimes, I wonder if these things could be which is which. Which are Rand's sane thoughts and which are his insane thoughts, I guess.
Sure. I mean, they're all his thoughts.
Yeah, so that's why I hesitated.
And some of the information he gets, he casts as his own memories, some of the information he casts as Lewis Theron's memories.
Yeah.
And sometimes when he takes action, without being aware of it, he blames Lewis Theron.
Yeah, like sometimes he believes he figured something out accidentally, and other times he believes he taught himself somehow, and those are different. This is what I'm talking about, where it's a little difficult to even talk about. How do you phrase this?
Right.
You figured it out in the way you fiddle with something for a while until you realize how it works, as opposed to a man inside of his head who teaches him things is the alternative, I guess. That's how you say that?
And some of that is, well, he's getting memories of a past life, so it's not like he needs to be taught it. He just needs to remember it.
Yeah.
Thing. But then how does he couch that memory? Is it like, oh, I just have this knowledge because I'm kind of gaining this memory, or do I sequester this memory into the madness in my head? Anyway, moving on. We've talked about that so many times.
It's confusing. Yeah. And on purpose, I think.
Yeah, agreed. It's the whole Jordan is a master of making the unreliable narrator and making a lot of options seem true. So, like, especially, I think that he does a masterful job of letting you argue that Rand is both sane and insane at the same time.
Yeah.
Right? He doesn't ever make one obviously true and one obviously false.
And there's so many of these scenes that, you see maybe part of the scene from Rand's perspective and part of the scene from Avienda's perspective, but you have to kind of walk away knowing that you still don't really know. You still don't have 100% understanding of what happens there. Each person in every situation is kind of, everything that they see is colored by their own ideas or what they think of things. For instance, what we were just talking about a few minutes ago, where for all these years I've thought Taim had been channeling for much longer than anyone else because Rand thinks so for a moment, and it just stuck with me.
Mm-hmm.
But that's not really... Rand just thinks he looks older, and he's not. Not as old as Rand thinks.
And there's no real contradiction to that in the rest of the book. There's no place where he's like, oh, I was wrong about that, or oh, blah, blah, blah. So...
Yeah, and there'll never be a moment where it's like, oh, here's Mazrim Taim's birth certificate, so we know exactly how old he is. That's just not going to happen.
Release Mazrim Taim's birth certificate. How do we know he's not Demandred? We want to see the long form birth certificate.
I like it, yeah. I had a little bit to read here, and I don't want to go on too terribly long, maybe read a page or so, but I really liked this little scene where... we just walked through. Rand brings Taim to where the tower will be. I don't want to call it the tower yet. It's not. It's the farm now. Yeah. And kind of gives Taim some warnings about what his life's going to be like, and then walks Taim over to show him this sorry lot, as Taim says.
Which happens to be a very powerful group of channelers. And I want to go...
Yeah.
Or will be, anyway. They aren't quite yet. Just want to go down the list. I think I talked about this briefly, but Eben Hopwell, the skinny fellow. We know Eben Hopwell.
Mm-hmm.
Eben Hopwell was bonded and actually fought in the battle to cleanse the source, and he was killed by Arengar. Like, he's the one, he jumped at Arengar and was like, she's holding Saidin, and then...
Oh, yeah.
And then he gets nailed, but he delays her long enough that the others are able to escape. But because he's in a circle, he ends up dying just because he doesn't have the ability to channel, even though he's the one who realizes that he needs to attack. So he sacrifices himself. So he sort of proves to the Aes Sedai that the men really are there to defend the Aes Sedai, like the ones they're bonded to. It sort of solidifies the bond. To me, that's the moment when the Black Tower and the White Tower sort of become one, and you have these pairs of Aes Sedai and Ashaman who are bonded together, who care about each other.
I sort of imagine that as like the final form, yeah.
Yeah.
The double bonding thing.
Totally. Oh, and we always say, you know, the best things of the best works were always men and women working together. And so you take that and add the whole Bond New Age thing, and you end up with a really cool symbiotic relationship, which is represented by the symbol.
Yeah. Also, Fedwin Moore, who we have a lot of in the future.
And he's the one who goes insane when he's protecting Min, and Min convinces him to play with blocks instead of tearing the tower down and play with those, and Rand has to feed him poison.
He goes mad eventually.
And then you've got Dalmor Flynn, who's super awesome at healing, and he also figures out how to heal Stilling, independent from Nynaeve. So that's what I always remember him for. And then you've got Jerk Grady, who hangs out with Perrin.
Yeah.
He does try and heal Rand at the end of the last battle, but he's mostly one of Perrin's two Ashaman.
Yeah, who's Perrin's other? Is it, that's with him for a long period of time? Grady and...
Niald, who we haven't met yet, but Fangar Niald. He shows up, he's there at Dumai's Wells, so he's not in this group yet, but he will appear in this book. Oh, and that's right, and Zyreel Ellie reminds me that Grady has a very, very ugly baby who is most likely Geidel Kane reborn.
Very, very ugly baby.
Those of you who think that Ulver was Geidel Kane reborn, nope, we have confirmation it was actually Grady's baby.
I thought it was Oliver for the longest time. I mean, it seemed like it would work, but, you know.
Yeah, the timing doesn't quite.
Yeah. I wanted it
Listen,
to. I think we wanted
there can
it
be
to.
two ugly children in this world at the same time. It's entirely possible.
Lots of babies are ugly.
Lots of babies are ugly.
It's just no one says anything.
Yeah, how do you... See, if a baby's cute, you say, "Oh, that's a cute baby." If the baby's ugly, you say, "Oh, he looks just like you."
This way you're not lying.
Yep. Time moves at different rates, but it doesn't move backwards in the dream, and we have confirmation from that. So the fact that Geidel Kane existed in the dream at the same time that Oliver was alive means there's no way for Oliver to be Geidel Kane.
Too bad.
And we have confirmation from Sanderson that Jer Grady's son is Geidel Kane.
I really enjoyed just the description of what the farm looks like while it's still the farm, you know, before it's really anything. It's just like a field. Just like a couple of...
It's literally a farm, yeah. It's like an old rotting farmhouse and an old overgrown field.
It's kind of funny to look at. I'll read just until, like, Taim walks up to them and is like, "Are you serious?"
I feel like it fits the theme of Rand trying to retake the wilderness, establishing schools, taking over abandoned farmhouses. He's trying to basically bring civilization back, and this is part of it.
Yeah, I like it. And the sort of, you know, the dragon breaking, everything is broken and destroyed at some point, and then it comes back together in a different shape. And I kind of see that a lot with a lot of the Ashaman's lives, but also a lot of these physical places, like you said.
You got to clear the rubble. And that's not just true for the seals, that's true for society as well.
The woods gave way abruptly to a farmyard, with a sprawling thatch-roofed house of 2 weathered stories, smoke rising from one of its chimneys, and a large barn that had a distinct lean. The day was no cooler here than in the city a few miles away, the sun no less blistering. Chickens scratched at dust. 2 dun cows chewed their cud in a rail-fenced enclosure. A flock of tethered black goats busily stripped leaves from bushes within their reach, and a high-wheeled cart stood in the barn's shadow, but the place did not look like a farm. There were no fields in sight. Forest stretched all around the yard, broken only by the dirt track meandering northward, used for rare excursions to the city, and there were too many people. 4 women, all but one in her middle years, were hanging wash on a pair of lines, and nearly a dozen children, none older than 9 or 10, played among the chickens. There were men about, too, most doing chores. 27 of them, though in some cases it was a stretch to call them men. Even Hopwell, the skinny fellow pulling a bucket of water from the well, claimed to be 20, and was certainly 4 or 5 years younger. His nose and ears seemed the biggest parts of him. Fedwin Moore, one of the 3 men sweating on the roof replacing old thatch, was a good deal huskier, with a good deal fewer blotches, but certainly no older. More than half of the men had only 3 or 4 years on those 2. Rand had almost sent some of them home. Eben and Fedwin, at least, save that the White Tower took novices as young and sometimes younger. Gray showed among darker hair on a few heads, and crease-faced Damer Flynn, in front of the barn using peeled branches to show 2 of the younger men how to handle a sword, had a limp, and retained only thin fringe of white hair. Damer had been in the Queen's Guards, until he took a Mirandian lance in his thigh. He was no swordsman, but he seemed competent to show the others how to not stab themselves in the foot. Most of the men were Andoran, a few Kyrianan. None had come from Tyr yet, though amnesty had been proclaimed there too. It would take time for men to come that far. Damer was the first to notice the maidens, tossing down his branch and directing his pupil's attention toward Rand. Then Eben dropped his bucket with a yell, splashing water all over himself, and everyone was scrambling, shouting out at the house, to cluster anxiously behind Damer. 2 more women appeared from inside, aproned and red-faced from cook fires, and helped the others gather the children behind the men. "There they are," Rand told Taim. "You have nearly half a day left. How many can you test? I want to know who can be taught as soon as possible." "This lot was dredged from the bottom of—" Taim began contemptuously, then stopped in the middle of the farmyard, staring at Rand. Chickens scratched in the dust around his feet. I could go on, because I thought this was a lovely scene. Taim's like, he's incredulous. He's just incredulous. Bunch of teenage boys and their chickens? This is what you got? Really, man?
Couple old men. The contrast between Rand's knowledge, right? He knows how to travel, which is lost knowledge that is almost like unbelievable that he knows how to do it, and yet he doesn't know how to test someone for the power, which is like the most basic thing, like really the first thing you get taught. Like his
right. He's never seen it.
It's like trying to talk music to somebody who's like only ever listened to the radio. And it's like, yeah, they know some really impressive stuff, and like they're totally into like some good bands, but there's huge holes in his knowledge. He doesn't know the basic, like, I'm not good with music either, so I guess I'm using myself as an example. Like, yeah, I like good music, but I mean, you want to talk to me about where it comes from? I have no idea. I don't know the basic,
I'm the same.
Yeah,
I can appreciate the art, but that's all I can do.
Yeah. But it's like being that, except Rand also happens to be like a virtuoso. He's like, he doesn't know like the basics about it, but he happens to also be able to play like masterful classical pieces on the piano.
But not like the E scale. Like he doesn't know how to do that. But
right?
It's something a child would know, but not yeah.
Yeah. Someone's like, wait, you don't know how to play chopsticks?
Seriously?
Really? But you just did Beethoven's Fifth. It's like, yeah, but no one ever taught me chopsticks.
Never heard it.
What? Doesn't make any sense. Okay. Took a little while, but I think we got there to the right analogy. I like his optimistic that we have a year or two till the final battle. Yeah, try 6 months.
Oof. Honestly, that's maybe luckier than not, though, because, well, until Rand cleanses the source, who knows how many of these men would even have survived.
It is, it's a very short time, though, between the forming of the Black Tower and the actual cleansing of the source.
It's surprisingly short. As we go through these later books, especially since we've gotten to Lord of Chaos, I forget often. How rapidly it speeds up. The amount of time in each book is shorter and shorter, even though the books are as long, you know?
Well, and in a lot of cases, what we're seeing is more plot lines, more perspectives, and shorter time frames between those perspectives. So we're not getting 3 months while, you know, Elaine and Varen and Egwene and Nynaeve travel back to the White Tower. Like, there's a couple of months where they were just traveling together. Or when Suan and Min and Leanne were traveling, right? And with Logain. Like, nearly a year went by. And it was just like, oh, that's just a chapter. That just doesn't happen in these later books.
Yeah. I mean, in this prologue, the prologue of this book, for instance, there's like 3 or 4 perspectives that all happen at the same time. Or really close.
Yeah, we kind of assume that the prologue itself all happens over the course of 2 weeks. I think from the beginning to the end, right?
I think so. Yeah,
there was that gap, and most of this chapter, like, this is all a day. All of this Rand stuff that we cover, this all happens in one day, and it's like another 4 chapters. So and then we go to somebody else's perspective and get to sort of re-experience those 4 days. So yeah, things are really getting choppy and slowed down. I can't wait to see Perrin. I'm getting excited for Perrin. I often wonder, like, he's complaining a lot, but Taim is being handed the opportunity to take control of Rand's forces and basically create a whole new set of dreadlords.
Yeah, this was an amazing opportunity for anyone, but particularly for a dark friend.
Who can turn, yeah. I think he does complain later that too many people pick up the knack of traveling, so it becomes hard for him to only recruit dark friends. So there is a point where the Black Tower, in a way, begins to build itself without him as to something pretty easy. But
I was just going to say, people in Discord are asking when the turnings start. Definitely not yet.
Not for a while. I want to say that's more last battle. He's recruiting dark friends, yes, but I don't think he's turning very many until much later. Certainly not until after this book.
Well, I still liked Skylake's view here, saying, all right, Taim is doing some reverse psychology. Like, he's acting super annoyed that Rand is putting all this, not just work on him, but, like, you know, these illiterate, dirty farm boys or whatever, as you know, Taim is kind of disdainful a little of them at first, or he says he is.
And he's probably hoping for a better start. Maybe at least some people that were tested for channeling, at least a group of people who could potentially channel. Maybe a group of people who maybe even could touch. I bet he's just like, wait, you haven't even done the minimum? All you've given me is a bunch of people who are willing to be Ashaman? I'm saying Ashaman.
Who are willing to try to learn. Yeah,
willing to try to learn. Like, that's such the lowest bar. Like, give me something. But I do really want to address that. Like, a lot of people have read online that at this point in the series, Jordan was writing Taim as Demandred, and I totally disagree with that. Like, I do not think at this point it was something that was in the notes a long time ago that it was a potential, and he changed his mind long before he wrote this scene.
Do we know when? Out of curiosity.
When he changed his mind?
Yeah.
Because if you read his notes, there's a lot of contradictory stuff in there, and a lot of stuff that changes later. And a lot of people have taken the fact that he originally sort of wrote potentially Tam as Demandred as like, oh, he changed it last minute. But all the evidence that I've seen really points to him making that change long before the fan community thought it up. And like, I think he still put a lot of red herring in there for it, but I don't think it was ever his intention when he was writing this book to make Taim Demandred.
I'm nodding.
And Anna, no, he didn't change it because everyone caught on to it. That's total bull. Like, that's as far as like, it's just that it drives me nuts that people keep telling me that over and over and over again, that the fan base caught on to it, so Jordan changed it, and he was originally writing time. That's false. That is completely false. It's a rumor spread on the internet, and until someone gives me a goddamn quote from Jordan, and like, and then his like last year or two, Team Jordan said yes in his notes at some point he thought about making Taim Demandred in disguise. But his notes, like I said, like, you go back and look at those notes, they have, like, Aes Sedai with a different name, and, you know, you've got 4 main characters leaving the 2 rivers, and, like, his notes are not canon. They show his process, but his notes changed a lot. And by saying in the notes Demandred was Taim, therefore, when he was writing this Demandred as Taim is just false and pisses me off. It's just wrong, and it bugs me that the fandom can't, like, get over it.
Well, people want to see as much as they can. I understand that instinct. I personally kind of try to stay away from a lot of the speculative stuff because I don't, you know, I know that I don't know, and I'm more maybe comfortable just accepting whatever this is at its face value. I had here Rand's little speech to Jur Grady. I don't know if I want to read it. We did talk about it a little I did talk about it a little right at the beginning, where he feels guilty about guilting Jur Grady into staying. Jur tells Rand that he wants to go home, and Rand says, "You can leave any time until you start learning the channel. But once you take that step, we're going to treat you like a soldier. You have to stay."
Well, and that's very much along the lines of the White Tower, which is, as soon as you start to learn to channel, you are dangerous, because once you can touch the source, there's that sort of period of time between when you can touch it and when you control it, and in that period of time, you can easily burn yourself out or kill a bunch of other people, so once you started the training, you're stuck, because at least until you're safe, and then, if you know, at that point, if you try and leave, I think the Black Tower would be kind of not happy, because then you take all that knowledge and go be a potentially mad rogue Ashman. That's a bad thing. So yeah, once you start, you really can't stop.
Yeah.
So then he tests...
I think Damer is first.
No, Damer Flynn first, yeah. And as we know, pretty much all the names we named, we went through those, like, 4 names, and they all pass. There's one here called Kelly Hulden who doesn't. That, as far as I know, we never hear from him again. His wife ushers him away, and she's very, very happy. And that's the last time we hear from him. Although we do eventually find out that the ones who fail, that Rand gets a whole army from them that gets trained up under Bashir, I believe. And that ends up becoming, I think, Matt arms them all with his fast crank crossbows.
Yeah.
And so that becomes like that fast crank
the Dragon
crossbow
Legions.
bolt. Yeah, totally.
Is there more than one?
You know, we don't see a lot of them. Yeah. It's a lot of soldiers.
Yeah, I think it goes something along the lines of, like, you can come and do your testing at the Black Tower, and if you fail, you can still serve. You can still be a soldier. You just can't, you can't channel, obviously.
Well, and that's how the recruiting goes, is they go out and say, hey, do you want to be a soldier for the Dragon Reborn? People say yes, and they said, so, he can channel. We're just going to test you to see if you can channel. Because when Taim doesn't go out being like, I'm looking for channelers, he goes out and says, I'm looking for recruits for the soldiers for the Dragon Reborn's army.
Yeah, true. I haven't thought of this in a long time, but that wouldn't be a popular way to walk into a village.
No. No, and he talks about that when Rand asks him, what are you going to recruit?
Male channeler here, looking for other male channelers.
Nope.
Anyone want to hang out?
Super Skylake is saying he thinks the Legion of Dragon has 15k.
That sounds about right. I remember it being sizable.
And it's one of those things that I think Darth Rand doesn't do a good enough job. He really should have done more with those groups. He kind of just dumps them on Matt and Bashir and just ignores them. I wish he'd done more to sort of use those troops and keep them in mind.
Yeah, they're one of the only armies that's, like, truly his, I mean, I guess you could say the Aiel are, but the Aiel are a people, so it's a bit different. It is maybe a little odd that he doesn't use the Legion a little more, although I guess when you have the Maidens of the Spear, like, what do you want a bunch of guys with crossbows for? You've got, like, thousands of ninjas.
At least Matt uses them effectively.
Yeah. I thought it was interesting here, as Taim does his test, he suspends a single flame in between himself and Damer, and tells Damer to concentrate on it, and there's this idea of a resonance, which I don't think is ever explained really well, but I guess that...
I would assume that basically... okay, here's how I think of it. If you know anything about hearing testing, where they play a tone in your ear, and then they can tell you whether you can hear or not. This isn't the one where you raise your hand. This is the one called an OAE, or an otoacoustic emission. And the way it works, and this is kind of a cool little piece of biology that I only know because my parents are audiologists, is it plays two tones that are offset by a very specific distance in frequency. And if you can hear, your ear will actually respond with a third tone. If you can't hear, that tone will be damped. And so...
Cool.
It's a really cool resonance in your ear canal that helps doctors understand whether or not you have the ability to hear sound. And I almost think they are doing the same thing, where it's just like producing two slightly off frequencies until you get the sound coming, or basically the resonance coming out of the channeler. Zyreal, that is the test they do for babies. My parents were instrumental in getting legislation passed in Virginia that forced all babies to get newborn hearing screening.
That seems important.
Yes. Yeah, it's one of those things that, like... But before OAEs, they didn't have a way to test baby. You know, they couldn't say, "Okay, baby, raise your right hand when you hear the beep." That didn't work.
Get it together, baby. Follow the instructions.
Come on, baby. And so the OAEs are... You can also do an ABR, which is a brainstem response, but then you have to like stick the electrodes to the skull and sedate the babies, which is a little more
less
dangerous,
popular,
obviously. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I was definitely one of the earliest test subjects for OAEs. My otoacoustic emissions have been published in all sorts of books because I was a baby and a test subject.
Well, at least their parents weren't geneticists.
Right. That's what you think. Yeah.
I'm going to read this little scene. I actually didn't initially set this to read, but I kind of like it. Just Taim talking to Damer. Is Damer, by the way, what we're agreeing on? Damer, not Dahmer?
Damer Flynn, yeah. Dahmer sounds a little too much like the Dahmer Party.
Yeah. So, abruptly, a tiny flame appeared, an inch tall, dancing in midair, equidistant between the three men. Rand could feel the power in Taim, though only a small amount, and see the thin flow of fire the man wove. The flame brought a startling relief to Rand. Startling, because it was proof Taim could really channel. Bashir's first doubts must have struck home in the back of his mind. "Concentrate on the flame," Taim said. "You are the flame. The world is the flame. There is nothing but the flame." "Don't feel nothing but an ache starting in my eyes," Damer muttered, wiping sweat from his forehead with the back of his rough, calloused hand. "Concentrate," Taim snapped. "Do not talk, do not think, do not move. Concentrate." Damer nodded, then blinked at Taim, frowned, and froze, staring silently at the small flame. Taim seemed intent, but on what, Rand was not sure. He seemed to be listening. A resonance, he had said. Rand focused, listening, feeling, for something. Minutes stretched out, with none of them moving a muscle. 5, 6, 7 slow minutes, with Damer hardly blinking. The old man breathed hard, and he sweated so much he looked as though someone had undid a bucket over his head. 10 minutes. Suddenly Rand felt it. The resonance. A small thing. A tiny echo of the minuscule flow of power pulsing in Taim. But this seemed to come from Damer. It had to be what Taim had meant. So, that's not crazy descriptive, but I feel like it gives us enough to at least visualize what's happening.
I wonder if the test for resonance in male channelers ever is what led to the flame in the void? That, like, staring into the flame?
Yeah, I wondered that too. Part of why I wanted to read that was because this is the same exercise Rand does, except he just visualizes the flame instead of making it.
Mm-hmm.
Which you could see in, like, lots of types of Buddhist meditation and things like that. There you have a thing like this, like a single mantra, for instance, which could be a phrase, it could be a thing, it could be like a prayer wheel, but you know.
And maybe something about the test and having the person stare into the void helps them having them stare into the flame helps them get into the mood for, like, in the void, and lets them almost embrace the source a little bit. Like when Moraine takes Egwene through the exercises of the novice.
Mm-hmm.
And, like, that's sort of, she's able to embrace it, kind of. And remember that pulsing light that she does on the palm? And Moraine says that last one was you. I think that's a similar sort of resonance situation, just with a globe of light instead of a flame.
Where Moraine made like a rhythm to the pulse of the light, and was having Egwene follow along, and then kind of let go. Like pushing a kid on a bike. You can start to feel when they're like, okay, all right, you're balanced. If you keep running alongside, they don't know that they're pedaling the bike by themselves. They think you're still doing it.
I still remember my dad doing that to me when I was a kid. I'm like, I was yelling at him to let go, and he's like standing 30 feet behind. He's like, I already let go. And then you fall over because you realize you let go.
Because you turn around. What?
Yeah. What?
Yeah, I distinctly remember padding. I remember not having skin on my knees for long periods of my childhood, but also the giant pads. Did you have like the elbow and like helmet, elbows, knees, like all the...
I think when I was roller skating, I got all that stuff.
Okay. I think I started both around the same time.
But when I was biking, I only wore a helmet. I think I was pretty good at biking pretty much right away. I don't remember falling a lot.
I remember learning and having all the padding, and I remember learning that having all the padding wasn't cool. That happened later. I have a pretty good memory of that. And then like not wanting to wear my helmet because like cool guys don't wear helmets or something. Kids get all kinds of dumb ideas. Yeah.
Brain dead guys don't wear helmets. Yeah. Yeah. Protect your noggin. Protect your melon.
Rand tells Taim he picked up the test straight away, just had to see it once. Rand telling Taim to teach them as much as they can learn as fast as they can learn it.
And this is one of those things that becomes a bit of a theme of the Black Tower, where Taim says weapons, I assume, and Rand says weapons. And like at the very end, Rand is like, you know what? They're not weapons. They're men. And they need to learn to be men. That was his last command to them. And that's an important point, and this is sort of the setup for that. Of, hey, teach them to be weapons, treat them like weapons, treat them like objects. And only when he comes back down from the mountain and has had his epiphany, he's like, no, they're men. They're not weapons. I need to treat them like people.
Yeah, come to think of it, I'm kind of glad you brought up Veins of Gold, because right after that, weapons, Rand agreed. They had to be weapons, all of them, himself included. Could weapons allow themselves families? Could a weapon allow itself to love? Where did that come from? And then the dialogue just picks back up. This is what I was talking about, one of those moments where I'm like, wait, could that have been Lews Therin? And Rand just doesn't realize it's Lews Therin? Like, is that what's happening, you know? Is that why it's not...
A little bit.
You know what I mean? Where it's like, sometimes we just have stray thoughts, and it's not because there's a crazy man living in your brain, you know? It's just, you just have weird thoughts sometimes.
Yeah, and this does tend to be... The learning to be human is what supposedly Cod Swain teaches Rand, is right? Learning how to be a man and not NDR. Yeah. And then Rand goes off on this rant. I'll defeat the Dark One and cleanse Sidene, and he goes off and I'll do this and I'll do this. And I'm wondering, again, he's saying that to Taim, but I bet a lot of that information gets right back to the Dark One. And so I think one of the reasons the Dark One is sort of aware and looking for his plan to cleanse the Dark One. It also gives Taim the clear clue that, like, you don't happen to have any Sangreal, do you? A certain Choden Call Sangreal, maybe?
Yes. So when they start saying, Rand's holding the Dragon Scepter, this area, they're talking, Rand says, like, let's see. He's saying, I'm going to cleanse Sidene. And Taim's like, how? You would need so much power.
Do you have something that has that much power? And he's like, never mind what I've got. Which is basically the way of saying yes.
I have heard of things called Sangreal. Yeah, here it is. Do you have one you could think you actually... Never mind what I have or I don't. Rand's like, yeah, I have a bunch. All these Forsaken searching high and low, and Rand's got like a good, nice little handful of them.
Yeah. Well, he's got his little fat man Terangreal in his pants. He obviously has Kalendor, which is, sealed up in Tyr. And the Choden Call, which he's got stored away.
The male and female.
Yeah. Yeah, and we saw him have those, because Lanfear saw him putting them away into an alcove, so he's got them hidden away somewhere.
Yeah.
Not really sure where he's keeping them right now.
Are they still hidden in Ruidian?
Yeah. Didn't he, like...
That's where we saw him hide them in that scene, right? I don't know if he moved them after that.
No, I think he has to go and retrieve them when he goes to cleanse the source. That's, like, one of the things he goes and does. He gets the satchel before he gets Nynaeve, and the satchel has the Choden Gall in it.
I want to say he goes right back to Ruidian and undoes the fake wall.
Yeah, so I think they stay there until the cleansing.
I think I'm remembering that right.
Yeah.
So they're just sitting there. Lanfear knows where they are.
New.
Oh, right. Well, not that it matters much now, but...
And I don't think she comes back as Sindane until after the cleansing, so...
It is a pretty rapid fire. Sort of glad you brought that up earlier, because here we have Rand bringing Taim to the farm, saying, like, here's your men, and I'm going to go cleanse Sidene soon.
We're only 3-ish books away?
So I guess it's...
Timeline-wise, it's not very far. Yeah.
A month or two.
There's a little bit of... I do feel like the Ashman learn stupidly fast. That is the one thing that I'm like, oh, wow, they really do...
Yeah.
By the end of this book, they are really effective weapons, when in the beginning they're not. Even none of them can channel. And they're being pushed. And that is something we see with the channelers, is you can push them if you're willing to lose a few in training. Pushed
and stretched on purpose, and our only other example of channelers learning are women, are really the girls in the tower. I mean, I guess we see a little bit of what happens in Shan-Chan and the Waste, but really mostly we just see what happens in the tower, and the girls are discouraged from channeling really outside of supervision, or really any more than they strictly have to. So the women could probably be learning a lot faster if that was the goal. It just isn't.
Right. And these guys are doing everything from cooking their meals to
building the tower that they live in. Yeah.
Exactly.
Which, cool team building exercise, by the way.
And if you fuck up, he'll crack your skull, and you better hope you live to see the evening, or else no one will heal you. Great.
It always kind of reminds me of, if you've ever read about a Roman encampment, and how each day a Roman legion stayed in place, the encampment got more, like the defenses became more sophisticated each day. So if you read that this legion stayed there for a month, then, the holes got deeper and the walls got higher. I always imagine the Black Tower just like that. It's always changing, getting bigger and being expanded.
Totally. There's a moment where Matt is attacked by some dark friend, Aiel, and he says, all right, what we're going to do is every night we're going to build a trench around the camp, and we're going to fill it with spikes. And they're like, every night? That's crazy. And I'm like, that's exactly what the Romans did.
Yeah.
They just kept fortifying whatever place they were in. And some of the temporary fortifications they put up, like embankments and stuff like that, are still evident today. Like it's the temporary, quote unquote, embankments they put up in ancient Rome are still around 2,000 years later. Like, that tells you how temporary they were.
Yeah, packed earth, man. I mean, they made the Great Wall of China out of it. Sounds funny, but it's just knew how to build stuff back then.
Yeah, it's amazing how long two stones stacked on top of each other will stay in place.
Yeah.
Pyramids, walls.
We see in a moment after Rand and Taim are talking about cleansing Sidene that Rand has one of his... there's another male channeler in the room attacks, where Lews Therin starts screaming in his head.
Yeah.
Rand eventually screams, "Shut up," back in his own head, and the voice vanishes. And just you keep an eye on anyone who learns too fast.
Do you know, do you have an idea why Lews Therin shuts up when Rand yells at him and addresses him directly?
No.
I don't either. Just from the maybe it's Rand being shocked in his own head.
In the future, that trying to do a dialogue with the voice doesn't ever really work.
There's a couple of times when he responds, but it's like talking to any crazy man. He's
right. It's like, is it responding to him, or is just more mad ravings? It's hard to say.
And I just haven't been able, in all my reads and rereads, I've never been able to come up with a rationale for why Lewis Theron is silent sometimes and not others. And as far as I can tell, it's just down to him being completely nuts. Like, that's it. It's just random, as far as I can tell.
I think that's exactly right, yeah.
But I'd love to hear and if anyone has any opinions about, like, hey, this is what we think is going on with Rand's, with Lewis Theron talking versus not talking. I'd love to hear a theory. If there's something that it depends on, if it's the amount of channeling he's doing, if it's his presence to other channelers. Like, I really don't know or if it's just a random assortment of mad voices in his head, which is highly likely.
This guy says after the flows cross, everything goes crazy wonky.
Oh yeah, that's going to be interesting to talk to.
And then, yeah, it gets more complicated, too. There's a lot of other stuff going on as well after that.
The one question I had, I thought Rand knew how to stop the heat and cold from touching him. I thought he had learned that already.
Oh,
And here he's like, oh, I did Asmodean not teach him how to avoid the heat and cold?
I guess not.
I'm getting my timeline a little confused, but yeah, I guess Rand doesn't know how to avoid being touched by... Yeah, I thought he did too. I thought that there was a whole scene where he's like, I wonder if the Aes Sedai will notice that the heat bothers me as little as it bothers them. And that was the whole upgrading thing that he learned from Asmodean. I honestly think this might be a continuity error. Did Taim know something like the Aes Sedai trick of not letting heat or cold touch them? Let me do a quick... Well, you do the reading. I'm going to search Fires of Heaven and see if I can find a reference.
Just searching my own brain, I can't think of that showing up in what we've read so far in the podcast, but it must happen soon if it's not yet. It does seem late. Anyway, grins and outright laughter spread through the other maidens. Red-haired Mayra, at least 10 years older than Rand, slapping her thigh. Golden-haired Desora hiding her smiles behind a hand as she always did. Scar-faced Leah bounced up and down on her toes, while Sulin almost doubled over. Aiel humor was strange at best. Heroes and stories never had jokes made at their expense, not even odd ones, and he doubted kings did either. Part of the problem was that an Aiel chief, even the Karakarn, was not a king. He might have the authority of one in many ways, but any Aiel could, and would, walk up to a chief and say exactly what he thought. The bigger part, however, was something else. Despite his having been raised in the Two Rivers by Tam Althor and, until her death when he was 5, Tam's wife, Carrie, Rand's true mother had been a maiden of the spear, who died giving birth to him on one of the slopes of Dragonmount. Not an Aiel, though his father had been, but still a maiden. Now Aiel customs stronger than law had touched him. No, not touched. Enveloped. No maiden could marry and still carry the spear, and unless she gave up the spear, any child she bore was given to another woman, by the wise ones, in such a way that the maiden never knew who that woman was. Any child born of a maiden who was believed to be lucky, both in itself and to raise, though none but the woman who raised the child and her husband ever knew it was not her own. Yet beyond that, the Aiel prophecy of Ruidian said that the Karakarn would be such a one, raised by wetlanders. To the maidens, Rand was all those children come back, the first child of a maiden ever to be known, to everyone. Most, whether older than Sulin or as young as Jelani, welcomed him like a long-lost brother. In public, they gave him as much respect as they did any chief, marginal as that might be sometimes, but alone with them, he might as well have been their brother, though whether he was a younger brother or an older did not seem to have anything to do with the woman's own age. He was just glad that only a handful took Anila and Somara's path, alone or not. It was plain irritating to have a woman no older than himself, behaving as though he were her son. "Then we ought to go somewhere where I won't sweat," he said, managing a grin. He owed it to them. Some had already died for him, and more would before it was done. The maidens quickly subdued their mirth, ready to go where the Karakarn said, ready to defend him. The question was, where to go? Bashir was waiting for his carefully casual visit, But if Avienda had heard about that, she might well be with Bashir. Rand had been avoiding her as much as possible, especially being alone with her, because he wanted to be alone with her. He had managed to keep that from the maidens so far. If they ever so much as suspected, they would make his life miserable. The fact was, he had to stay away from her. He carried death with him, like a contagious disease. He was a target, and people died near him. He had to harden his heart and let the maidens die. The light burn him forever for that promise. But Avienda had given up the spear to study with the wise ones. He was not sure what he felt for her, only that if she died because of him, something in him would die too. It was lucky that she had no emotional tangles where he was concerned. She tried to stay close to him, only because the wise ones wanted her to watch him for them, and because she wanted to watch him for Elaine. Neither reason made the situation any easier for Rand. Exactly the opposite. The decision was easy, really. Bashir would have to wait, so he could avoid Avienda, and the visit to Wiraman, intended to begin in the palace with attempts at stealth meant to be pierced, would come now. A foolish reason to make a decision. But what was a man to do when a woman refused to see sense? It might work out for the best this way. Those who were supposed to learn of that visit still would, and perhaps believe what they were supposed to, all the more because it was made true in concealment. Perhaps the call on Bashir and the Saldeans would even seem more casual, because he left it until late in the day. Yes, twists within twists, worthy of a Kyrianan playing the game of houses. Seizing Saidin, he opened a gateway, the slash of light widening to show the interior of a large green-striped tent empty, save a carpeting of colorful rugs woven in Terran maze patterns. There was no chance of an ambush in that tent, less even than around the farm, but Anila and Myra and the others veiled themselves and darted through. Rand paused to look back. Kelly Holden was making his way toward the farmhouse, head down and his wife herding their 2 children at his side. She kept reaching over to pat him consolingly, but even across the farmyard Rand could make out her beaming face. Plainly, Kelly had failed. Taim was facing Jer Grady, both staring at a tiny flame wavering between them. Sora Grady, her son clasped to her breast, was not watching her husband. Her eyes were still locked on Rand. A woman's eyes cut deeper than a knife, another 2 Rivers saying. Stepping through the gateway, he waited for the rest of the maidens to follow, then released the source. He did what he had to do.
Quick follow-up, in Chapter 10, Taim actually teaches Rand how to avoid the heat and cold touching him, so apparently I was just getting my timelines mixed up. That is coming up.
Or why did Rand say, then we have to go somewhere where we won't sweat? This is like 2 pages. There's some Aiel humor in here too, so it gets extra confusing.
He still doesn't know who his mother is, officially, as far as I can tell. He knows she wasn't Aiel, but he doesn't know that she was Tigraine.
Yeah.
We speculated a little bit about whether the maidens who treated him like a son are the ones who maybe gave up their own children at some point, since he was the returned lost child of the maidens.
I've had that thought once or twice myself, and I kind of wonder about, I forget the exact names Rand mentions, but it made me wonder if these young women had given up their own children recently. And so, to them, he's really a representation of their own child, even though the years don't work,
Right. Well, I mean, it's just because he was born a long time ago, it doesn't mean he doesn't represent their son,
Anila and Samara, he says. It was plain irritating to have a woman no older than himself behaving as though he were her son.
I like this line. It was lucky that she had no emotional tangles where he was concerned. She tried to stay close to him only because... Avienda, no emotional tangles? None?
Nah, very simple, straightforward.
Yeah. Slightly misreading the situation there, Rand. Slightly misreading the situation. Zyreel wanted to point out that the Leah mentioned here is the one that gets lost in Shadar Logoth.
Oh. No, this was actually a pretty straightforward chapter. Because it's basically a conversation between Rand and Taim. I mean, there's a lot of things happening here, but...
Yeah, there's a lot in Rand's head, which I kind of like, and that's what was fun to talk about.
Thank you for listening to the Wheel of Time Spoilers podcast. Rate us in the Apple Podcast app or
support us on Patreon. Is that good enough?